Hi, good morning, everyone. We are very pleased to have our two speakers, Mr. Kevin Lim and also Mr. Junxian Lee, both respective entrepreneurs in their space, to come and speak to us today about what we call the most hot topic in this supply chain fraternity today. That would be building supply chains resilience and in the logistics space. Now, before we hand over them, I'd like to give a quick introduction about these two well-established speakers that we see in the entrepreneur space. Well, Junxian today has I would say that he's the CEO and founder of Moovaz, very agile kind of disruptive kind of a technology that helps organizations in multiple facets. And he's also a well-established entrepreneur in multiple spaces in the fintech industry itself. And as for Kevin, needless to say, disrupting the markets, we're trying to provide visibility on all carriers, which is instrumental and crucial in today's COVID-19 perspective, and that's about what we say. So before we carry on, I'd like to actually pass the mic over to them for a very quick introduction about themselves. Maybe Junxian, you'd like to go first?
Thanks. Hi everyone, I'm Junxian. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Moovaz. I have two other co-founders, so three of us together founded Moovaz in 2018, 2+ years ago. What we do, technically speaking, we Uberize cross-border relocation. We're a multi-sided platform, so we serve both demand and supply. We amalgamate on the supply side. On top of that, we have algorithms that solve based on our clients' key decision matrix. We operate cross-border once again and have presence in Hong Kong and Australia. This is my fourth startup. Yeah, very interesting. It's the first time I'm operating like a log tech startup, but there are very specific, I guess, like learning points operating such an outfit, and yeah, I'll be happy to chat a little bit more about it as we carry on.
Thank you, Junxian. Over to you, Kevin.
Yeah, hey, hi gentlemen, and everyone tuning in. So my name is Kevin, one of the co-founders of Tramés. So we are a relatively young company, so we only got started in 2019. So we are traditionally, working on, being able to reduce global trade barriers by providing visibility, orchestration, and document sharing across borders and across, supply chain stakeholders, right? So we bring together, traditionally siloed players and fragmented workflows on a single unified platform, where information documentation can be relayed in real time digitally. So we got incorporated in 2019. We started off with an innovation project with a Fortune 500 based out of the region. So to date, we've really grown, to about 500 different trade lanes. So being able to move goods, from this region out to the rest of the world is a good sort of like an honor for us. We are also working on picking up a POC with like a Japanese conglomerate, and we're looking to launch, also a SME focused product, for shippers of smaller size to be able to leverage the technology that we've built in the Q1 next year. So really happy to be here and chat with Junxian and Garry. Yeah.
Right. Thanks for the quick introduction, gentlemen. Right now, given the kind of a situation that we are currently in today with the COVID and whatever not that we see, it is imperative, right? Based on both gentlemen, what you see outside of your industry and within what you're experiencing, right? Maybe can you share a bit, right? What are the current landscape of the challenges that consumers are actually facing in terms of getting visibility, understanding the cross-border trade regulations as a start? I mean, it's like, what are your thoughts? Maybe Kevin, since you're the last to speak, would you like to take this first then?
Yeah, sure. I mean, visibility is just one segment, right? So we view organizations today, they have increasing demands. Everybody wants real-time or near real-time visibility, across their orders, their multimodal shipments, inventory across regions, right? And then also across their business network, both, in the distribution centers and in transit, right? So this visibility we view is really important to leverage for both upstream, so from your brand owners to the suppliers, to contract manufacturers, and also service providers, and also to downstream, right? So your brand owners to the distribution centers, service providers, and ultimately their customers, right? So they're really I would say important questions that they always ask the entire network. Where's my order or shipment? Is it according to plan? Is there a disruption, right? Do I meet regulatory government requirements? What's the status of my inventory? So for us, supply chain visibility is really about a capability that provides controlled access and transparency to accurate, timely and complete data and events within an organization and the services that they provide to execute global supply chains. So, if you only target visibility, there is a trend, right, to be able to leverage visibility and build value with like analytics, right? So the availability of this data, right? So what you're going to do with it, and how are you capturing accurate data can lead to more, robust and intelligent decision making across an end-to-end network, right? So therefore, like we view, visibility capabilities need to be embedded in a broader supply chain sort of strategy. Right, so I think Junxian can also share a little bit more, right, in this space, how you've made use of visibility and data and be able to address this COVID-19 challenge.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. Yeah, I think like concurring with Kevin, visibility is key, especially because now, I guess especially in today's age, right, so many things are in flux. Given the pandemic, actually, customs rules, for example, they keep changing depending on the pandemic situation within the locales, right? So it affects, like, I guess, like the carriers, it affects everything as well, on the first mile and the last mile. Yeah, so I think something that's interesting and something that I came to learn would be that every supply chain, right, is different. Yeah, ultimately there is a chain, and the chain is not homogeneous. What Kevin and Tramés, I guess, are trying to do is really bring visibility to the middle portion, right, which is the freight, right, and freight could be land, air, and sea. Yeah, but everything else, right, like even on the first mile and last mile, right, that part, I guess, in supply chains and in very niche supply chains like ours, we do personal effects, right, which is basically the movement of personal goods, not general cargo, right, but personal goods across border. Like, visibility is extremely poor. So when you don't have visibility and you don't have data, there's basically nothing you can optimize, right? Because you do need those data points before you can run it through algorithms to figure out which are the areas to optimize. Yeah. So I guess those are the two key things that I feel will be extremely value adding in today's day and age of supply chain. Number one is definitely visibility, and it has to look like data, right? The second thing is that given how volatile the entire market is, right? Especially for us, right? Today, like maybe like Singapore's customs is open, but Shanghai's embassy is not open. It's open 2 weeks later. So you kind of have to take note of all these timelines and then figure out how you orchestrate that cross-border move. So so especially in today's day and age, right, you have to be able to build your systems to be highly nimble and versatile. So much so that in the next 1.5, 2 years, given the pandemic situation, like you'll be able to address like very quickly changing situations on the go. Yeah, so nimbleness is key and visibility is key.
Right. Thanks, Kevin and Junxian, for sharing, right? So now, just to touch base a little bit on what you both gentlemen has shared, right? Now, with the current growing economic landscape of the e-commerce logistics, right? So what Kevin is focused on the cargoes from a BCO perspective, business cargo owners, and then for Junxian is more of a personal artifacts whenever you move across borders and all that, right? So when we look at all this, right, we talked about nimbleness, the visibility, right? But other than this, right, what are the challenges that organizations or rather service providers are actually trying to capture to be able to translate from from a traditional market to a nimble, improvised data visibility market in that sense? I mean, what are your thoughts about this when we are looking in this kind of a space? But perhaps Junxian, you'd like to take this first.
Yeah, sure. Like, I guess, like, for me, fundamentally, what has changed are expectations. And it started with consumer expectations. If you guys use, for example, like, I don't know, Q10, Lazada, Shopee, right? You realize that your expectation, right, is that shipping is free. How can that be, right? Somebody has to pay for shipping.
No,
right?
Shipping is never free for that.
Yeah, so someone is paying for it. But the customer's expectation, right, is that it's already that it's not going to be more than $2, right? Ideally, it's $1. Ideally, I choose the $0 option. So what has changed, I feel, is fundamentally consumer expectation has changed, and that has created a lot of pricing pressure on the supply chain side of things. And because there's a lot of supply, there's a lot of pressure on the pricing of supply chain, right? If you can't compete on price, then you have to figure out how you can compete on cost, which means that you have to figure out a way very quickly to be faster, cheaper, and better. Yeah, and technology definitely has to play a role in that. So I think what has really fundamentally changed is expectations, and it started from the demand front.
What about you, Kevin?
Yeah, maybe just to add on to Junxian's point, right? So I think traditionally, like trade, just buying and selling is getting more and more complex, right? Because now it's actually like the orchestration of maybe like 10, 20 organizations just to run a cross-border freight movement, right? And you have like all these different updates. So I mean, the approach I think that maybe both our companies take is, if you look at it, the whole is always going to be greater than the sum of its parts. Right. So if you're only looking at like I would say like the service level providers space, right? So there's always going to be competition and price pressures. But if you're able to optimize across the entire whole, right? Across the entire breadth, you're going to get a lot of you'll be able to unlock a lot of value, right? So I think we're starting to see, or we're trying to contribute to this concept of a multi-enterprise supply chain business network. Right. So, like with globalization changes, increased nationalism, expanding outsourcing of business processes, and also like economic volatility, they all have impact on, a company's like a supply chain resilience and efficiency. Right. So what we're really looking at is, with these global companies, they face a variety of challenges, right? So, activities involving data that reside outside of the enterprise. How do you pull that back in? Right, high variability and also technology maturities across the trading partners. You need to have this like inclusive technology sort of like strategy, right, to be able to bring everybody up. So like rising tide floats all boats, right? Kind of a signal. So there are many, I would say, like initiatives to look to engage with like business partners, understand ecosystems, and I think like for us, obviously the ABCs of technology, the AI, blockchain, and cloud is underlying infrastructure that is trying to push this adoption, and COVID definitely accelerated it, the adoption maybe like 5-7 years, right? Just because of this the sudden need, right, that you don't want physical interactions. How do you do trade, which is a traditionally paper-based and physical activity with very limited kind of like physical touch points, like no more paper documentation. Can you do everything electronically? What's the infrastructure that's needed? So these are some of the problem statements and I would say opportunities that we see in the space. Yeah.
Right. Thanks. Now, Kevin, touching base on what you mentioned, right, in terms of the ABCs, right, I also do see, right, there is a surge in a resurgence of an older technology in that sense. So when we look about the resurgence of the older technology, predominantly, right, we look at the voucher management system, right? So some of the key players, like the Swedish company, like the one that I've actually spoken to was Seamless Distribution. They are also looking at, in terms of how they are going to adopt their voucher management systems into the entire e-commerce space. And that itself, like what you mentioned, right, it's a partnership kind of a interest whereby people are coming together to actually try and bring value to the consumers. Now, back to Junxian's point about, now, from an e-commerce space, we are looking at how we should be, I would say, amortizing or reducing the cost of from a consumer perspective, right? I can share with you that, right, based on my conversations, even with Alibaba, Lazada, and all that, right? This is one of their biggest challenges that they have not been able to come around in terms of how do we amortize the freight cost, and especially to a consumer side. So for Kevin, right, you are looking at the middle rates, the middle carriers' visibilities, but there is I would say there is an open market in terms of the freight management system, of freight rates, whereby consumers cannot choose, depending on how the liaison comes about with that in terms of the partnership, right? That's number one. Now, interestingly, the next portion of that, right, would be we are seeing a surge in Vietnam, especially when they are known to be the largest e-commerce space that itself. With the rise of the investment of the new chip maker for Pentagon as a chip maker, investments are flowing in as a manufacturing facility. The need for, I would say, the Moovaz and the need for visibility in terms of a mid-range data would definitely be there. However, what I understood, or rather what I came to know, is that WTC, a World Trade Center, I would say, conference, has actually set up a building outfit, or rather an ecosystem in Vietnam, harnessing and trying to bring all startups to go into Vietnam as the as a belt or as a center of excellence for Indochina. And that's what they are actually trying to do, to marry all the technology players together and see how they can create an end-to-end ecosystem, providing what we call a supply chain visibility and resilience to all the risk factors that we see today. So that's one part of that, right? So, but when we look at all this, right, the next question I have, right, is what are the biggest challenges when you are facing, when you are dealing with all these kind of adoptions, and also especially pitching to your potential clients in terms of how they should adopt and what they should adopt? I mean, Junxian, from your perspective, right, since it's a personal Moovaz, what are your challenges and what are your thoughts around this?
Thanks, Garry. I guess I suspect my challenges will not be too different from Kevin's. Yeah, but I can definitely share like my side of the story. So if you look at our supply chain, right, you're talking about packers and then truckers and then I guess warehousing people, stuffing containers, and then hauliers, and then customs, warehousing, freight, and then on the destination country that is the opposite. So you're talking about a very, very traditional bunch of people. So if you're talking about the freight side, right, I would say the freight side is probably the most forward-thinking people. Yeah, we're talking about the packers, right? A lot of the packers that we kind of engage with, right, they are not so interested in blockchain, let's just say. So adoption would be challenging. Yeah,
okay.
And it's been our experience whereby fundamentally, right, if you look at Southeast Asia as a logistics hub, 50 years maybe. Yeah, and what that means, right, is that a lot of the ownership structures of the logistics companies, right, they are either second generation or third generation owners. So it's run by either the son or the grandson, but it's owned by the grandfather. And therefore, pushing through any major initiatives that would fundamentally change the way the business is run is going to be challenging. What we realize is that fundamentally the conversation has to be about two things first and foremost. Can you help me earn more money? Can you help me save more money? Right? Technology is nice to have, but it's a means to an end. Yeah, so I would say the biggest challenge that we face, especially operating in Southeast Asia, would be technology adoption. While I think theoretically everyone agrees it needs to happen, yeah, but on the ground, right, pushing it through to all of their warehouses, right, yeah, it's still a challenge. Right? So it's probably going to take, my guess, another 2.5 years of education before we can really drive adoption. So adoption is I guess, one of the key challenges I face.
What about you, Kevin?
Yeah, the region that we are operating in is really interesting, right? So there's different growth, diversity of like countries, volatility that we experience as a region. So like Southeast Asia, it's not like one holistic market, right? And trade, although it's like a global sport, right? They value local sort of localization, right, of technology to sort of like Junxian mentioned, the haulers need to be served, right? The different custom brokers that operate locally need to be served well. And you have to marry this with, your global MNCs, right? That do like 20,000, 30,000 TEUs per annum, right? Globally, they want this visibility. So how do you, really serve this market, right? So I mean, like in the region, there's a very interesting mix. So I think to tie back to say your e-commerce example, right? So if in the region, for example, in Singles Day, you're gonna have like places with single story multi-packers, right?
Correct.
Very manual processes, just packing and serving it. But in like dense areas, like say Singapore and Hong Kong, you got this like high investment in high tech, right? A lot of vertical factories or vertical distribution centers looking to optimize and power this volume at this surge, right? So it's really a interesting place to be a part of, So it's not really considered as one holistic market. So the way we look at it is, how do we sort of like aggregate all these sub markets, and how do you sort of like add value, right, to the end customers? Because ideally, right, the organizations are looking, to be able to say, if you are able to serve in this region, across languages, currencies, cultural differences, traditions, trade agreements, then this inclusive technology will be able to operate complex global supply chains and be able to scale, right? So I think that's where we are fundamentally trying to sort of like address that market space. Obviously, we did mention, like the ABC is not for everyone, right? So it really is like you have to find the customers that benefit or can benefit the most from these. But when you design these systems or design these products, it has to have these inclusive sort of like ecosystem that or like your multi-enterprise supply chain business network kind of like a philosophy, right? To be able to serve the entire market, so everybody gets included. You don't have these dark spots, right? So I think that's really like a interesting operating, I would say, cycle, like being in Southeast Asia. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Having said that, right, I think that, some of the major players, right, people like Alibaba or Alibaba China, the logistics arm, right, they are actually also looking to set up their entire, I would say, the hub, the e-fulfillment hub in Vietnam and Indonesia, Vietnam next year, Indonesia the year after or whatsoever, to actually service and actually harness the growth of what technology is able to bring and how to power the entire, I would say, 1111 in their respective areas, right? So this is, I think that, when they set it up, that is a space to watch out for, because I think that there will be a lot of disruptions that's going to come. Definitely, that's for sure, right?
Yeah, and the innovation is going to be driven by the champions, right? So you're going to like a technology sponsor, the one that sort of like leads the way, defines new business mechanisms, right? So I think back to Junxian's point on being able to work with the value proposition is interesting, right? In this
definitely. Because I think Junxian has a lot of fintech and also a lot of, I would say, other forms of startups that would be able to complement in towards the whole entire eco-structure. And I think that when Alibaba does comes up, and when they are in the midst of doing that, I think it would be great to actually reach out to them and see what are the forms of collaboration to actually maintain a form of, I would say, resilience and actually the visibility in supply chain. Now, talking about that, right, when we are moving ahead, right, looking ahead, right, over the next 12 months, right, so if I were to say, right, do you think that the infrastructure in Southeast Asia, right, or rather technology, right, adoption, since we talk about adoption and all that, right, are we ready to take the next quantum leap into providing an end-to-end aggregated kind of a space whereby we would be looking at visibility, managing transport costs and whatsoever, with all the factors that we are in. Now, I know that Junxian said that it will probably be the next 2 to 3 years, but let us focus just on the infrastructure itself, right? If we were to look at the infrastructure and the technology, is Southeast Asia ready to make the quantum leap? Maybe Kevin, you would think that first.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question, right? Thanks for that, Garry. I mean, the way we look at it, for this region to grow, right, it may be like you need 3 main stakeholders, right? So the business networks definitely needs to see value in terms of like being part of this end-to-end global ecosystem, right? Then you're gonna need the technology providers. How do you work on, say, open standards, right? How do you aggregate? How do you share data, securely and with trust, right, across regions? And the last is actually on, I would say, regulation, right? Because trade essentially is not just within private companies, but you also have a lot of like legislation and regulation that drives, adoption behind it. So these 3, I would say, are critical infrastructure, and you need many organizations, because we are such a diverse, I would say, region, right? To be able to lobby, stitch together workflows and data flows across these networks to be able to get this end-to-end visibility. And this is notwithstanding, the infrastructure kind of overheads, right? Your smart ports, your roads, your rail, right? So all these, it has to come together. And definitely these capabilities, I think the region is going through rapid digitalization. So obviously, I think there is a lot of interest, right? And it's also in the region's interest to be able to get this done as soon as possible, right? So I think that's from our perspective. Yeah.
What about you, Junxian?
I guess like adding on to what Kevin just shared, I feel most of the infrastructure is there. Yeah, and the challenge really will be adoption. So for example, right, the best way for like goods to travel from one point to the next point, right, the most efficient way is probably like the internet, right? Internet is a web, and then the digital packs, right, data packs that travel, it break bulk, and then it kind of reconfigures and then travel again and then break, so it becomes a web. So I guess like theoretically, goods should be similar, right? There should be a physical internet. So the theory is there and the infrastructure is also there. It's not too far off anyways. I feel what's lacking at the moment, right, is the economical reasons to do so and political reasons to do so. Ultimately, data is sensitive. Yeah, there are certain things that the Singapore government does not want to share openly with maybe our neighbors, right? And likewise, and economically, right, even though we are proponents of free trade, right, there are certain industries that are sensitive. So it's also difficult to like show hand, right? So I do think that maybe is something that is going to take a little bit of time to untangle. Yeah. So I guess from my perspective, I think we are at a decent point in time whereby the infrastructure is kind of there. Yeah, but yeah, the next kind of hurdles we need to get through are probably political and economical hurdles.
Right. Okay. No, interestingly, right? So it's like when we look at, it's like the adoption rate, we look at, the price sensitivity and all that, right? So, if I were to give a caveat out, right? Say that if you guys were to be able to build a technology, right? To be able to encompass any of these challenges that you see, right? What do you see that type of technology would be in your perspective? Maybe, Junxian, you would like to go first in this. What kind of technologies you think would be crucial in underlying all this success together?
Wow. So maybe if I because because I'm an operator, right? So
yeah,
I know I can't build. I guess I have an idea what the whole ideal situation would look like, but if I have to pick one battle to fight, right?
yes,
Like what I see in supply chain, right? I think the areas whereby the areas in the supply chain that are a little bit underserved are probably on the sorting hub side. Yeah, of things, which means that there are a lot of areas in Southeast Asia whereby the sorting hubs are still powered by humans. Yeah, so I think I feel freight is fairly efficient already. I think just comparing the entire supply chain as a chain, right? Trucking, for example, is also fairly efficient. I just feel that the warehousing part and the sorting part seems to be a little bit manual. So yeah, if I were to optimize something, right, maybe towards like robotics in some of these warehousing areas.
I see. What about
I
you,
feel
Kevin?
the biggest uplift.
What about you, Kevin?
I mean, I'm more of a software data guy, so I think at least for us, we do look at a couple of key technologies that if we want to optimize the whole thing, I think building or adopting a decision intelligence, being able to do this, aggregate this wide range of decision making techniques and then integrating them across the people, the process, the data, the technologies that power these sort of supply chains. I think this field is potentially something that will or it looks like to me like the way that we are going to be able to build or unlock efficiencies, right? So visibility is there. What are you going to do with all this data, right? How do you make sure all the data is sanitized, right? So if we adopt decision intelligence, being able to enable business users and process experts, right, to rather than data scientists, right, or like a really high skill cap or high paying roles to author, manage, and modify rules and decision logic, and then you apply this model to be able to optimize your cross-border value chain. I think that going to be a little bit it's going to be powerful, right? So like what's the infrastructure that's needed to do that? It's like in Netflix, you click a couple of shows, it reinforces the what you want to see, right? Or same with YouTube, right? That you got to do the same with global trade, because a lot of the data is siloed and fragmented, and some portions of this cross-border value chain is a little bit underserved. So like to Junxian's point, it could be the warehouse, or it could be the custom brokerage process, right? Different languages. So how do you aggregate all of this data and be able to use decision intelligence to optimize? Then everybody operates at a more efficient level, right? So I think that's potentially the way that we see how do you kick off inclusive tech to sort of unlock value in this space. Yeah,
I guess at the end of the day, what we are all trying to do, right, is that leveraging, I would say, for Junxian's point, right, it's about the type of robotics for the pick, pack, ship in terms of the warehousing sorting side. And then for you, Kevin, it would be more on the the freight management visibility side. But all this, right, I would say that it actually points to one thing, right? As we are looking at building I would say a more robust supply chain, right? and whatever that we have learned over the last 22 decades or 3 decades, right, has actually been thrown out of the window, given the fact that none of us alive has actually been experienced this kind of a pandemic situation, right? Therefore, I think that it is imperative, right, what we use with the data is how we adopt them, and to be able to generate what we call actionable intelligence. I think that is the key in terms of a successful adoption for any kind of technologies, right? But having said that, I think that, you know, I would like to wrap this up. You know, thank the both of you for your time, and it has been a kind of a discussion, right? Especially with the insights from yourself, Kevin and Junxian. It's like two diverse kind of shippers, you know, one for the cargoes or one for the personal goods. And I think that is a really a interesting conversation to have, and we'll be happy, you know, but I think due to the time constraint, if not, we'll be having this conversation for hours to go. I mean, thank you. Yeah, but thank you for the time. And all right, I'm really pleased to actually have this conversation, and looking forward to the next conversation that we will have. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Garry, Junxian. Take care, guys.
Thank you. Thank you.